You think you can just stroll in here like you own the place?" Frank Delaney snarled, his voice sharp with the smug authority of a man drunk on petty power, unaware he was spitting venom at the owner's daughter. The cab pulled away with a soft crunch of tires over gravel, leaving Jasmine Caldwell standing in front of the Westbrook Apartments with a single suitcase, a leather tote slung over her shoulder, and the kind of tired, travel-worn posture that came from an early morning flight across the country. The building looked exactly like it had the last time she saw it, 6 years ago, before she left for grad school and the whirlwind of her own life. The brick facade was still mottled with ivy, the small courtyard still framed by iron gates, and the same faded awning hung above the main entrance. But the energy was different. When she was younger, the place had hummed with warmth. Neighbors chatting on stoops, kids weaving between the benches with dripping ice cream cones. Now the air felt muted, tense. Jasmine wheeled her suitcase toward the main lobby door, but the keypad next to it was dark, unresponsive. She jabbed the buttons a few times, but nothing. The code her father had given her, 4217, didn't even register. She sighed and glanced around. That's when she remembered the back entrance. Maintenance workers used it whenever the front keypad was down. It wasn't unusual. She turned and started down the narrow walkway along the side of the building. From the second-floor office window, Frank Delaney was sipping his second coffee of the morning when he saw her. The first thought that crossed his mind wasn't Tennant. He leaned forward, peering over the blinds, eyes narrowing on the young black woman wheeling a suitcase toward the side gate. His lip curled just a little, in the way it often did when he thought someone didn't belong here. He prided himself on spotting trouble before it started, and over the years trouble had developed a face, a posture, a skin tone. Frank set down his mug, straightened his security polo shirt, and made his way to the back gate just as Jasmine reached for the handle. "Can I help you?" His voice was flat, but there was an edge under it, that I'm in charge here edge. Jasmine had heard from security guards and managers in too many places before. "Hi," she said, forcing a polite smile. "The front keypad's not working." "I'm here too." "You a tenant here?" "I'm yes or no," he interrupted. Her smile faltered. "No, but then you can't just walk in." He crossed his arms, blocking the gate. Jasmine's pulse skipped. She wasn't in the mood for this. She'd been up since 4 a.m. Her connecting flight had been delayed, and all she wanted was to drop her bags in the unit her father had reserved for her. "I'm here to see." "You visiting someone?" "Yes, my father." "Name?" "Robert Caldwell." That made him pause. The name clearly rang a bell. Maybe from the property ownership documents, maybe from old newsletters. But instead of connecting the dots, he raised an eyebrow. "Never heard of him renting here." "What unit?" She exhaled slowly. "Unit 5C. Frank pulled out a small notepad, flipping through it like he was checking some sacred roster. "That unit's not listed as occupied, and we don't allow strangers to wander the property. You'll have to wait outside until I can verify whatever it is you're saying." Jasmine's jaw tightened. "Look, the owner. I am the property manager. I keep this place secure. I don't care what story you're telling me." He glanced at her tote bag, at her suitcase as though those were somehow incriminating. "We've had issues lately. You understand." What she understood was the unspoken "you don't look like you belong here." She took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "The owner of this building is my father. I'm here for a short stay while I handle some personal matters. If you call him, He's not here, is he?" Frank said sharply. "So you're going to wait." Outside. Her father had warned her that the property manager could be a little overbearing about security. He hadn't mentioned this. "I'm not standing out here all morning," she said, stepping toward the gate. Frank's arm shot out, blocking her path. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The words hung heavy between them. Jasmine's skin prickled, a familiar combination of frustration and humiliation rising in her chest. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to her father's number. He didn't pick up. Straight to voicemail. She left a terse message explaining she was stuck outside and the manager wouldn't let her in. When she hung up, Frank was watching her with that infuriating, suspicious squint. "You can wait right here," he said. "I'll make some calls." She didn't like the way he said some calls. Inside his office, Frank didn't bother trying Robert Caldwell's number first. Instead, he picked up the landline and dialed a contact he knew by heart, the local police non-emergency line. "Yeah, I've got a suspicious female hanging around the property," he said, lowering his voice just enough to make it sound confidential. "Says she's visiting someone, but can't give me anything solid. Pulling luggage around like she's casing the place. Could you send a unit over?" Jasmine paced in the courtyard, her breath puffing in the cold morning air, wondering why her father wasn't answering. She didn't know it yet, but the gears were already turning. The courtyard's fountain dribbled weakly into its shallow basin, the sound almost mocking in the tense quiet. Jasmine leaned against the cold iron gate, scrolling aimlessly on her phone, trying to keep her pulse steady. She kept checking for her father's callback. Nothing. The temperature had dropped another degree. A faint breeze slid down the narrow walkway, tugging at the hem of her coat. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, pretending to check emails just so she wouldn't have to look at Frank, who was standing in the office doorway now, arms crossed, eyes fixed on her like she was some caged animal he wasn't sure he wanted to feed. Inside, Frank's voice carried in short bursts over the low hum of his office heater. "Yeah, still here, suitcase and all." "Uh-huh. Says she knows somebody, but you know how it is. Could be casing the units. We've had break-ins before. You can't be too careful," he was embellishing. Jasmine could hear enough to know he wasn't telling the full story. Her stomach twisted, but she kept her face neutral. Frank hung up and stepped back outside, leaning casually against the doorframe. "You might want to stay put," he said. "Officers will be here soon. They'll sort this out." She stared at him a beat too long. "You called the police?" "Standard procedure when we have a suspicious individual refusing to leave the property." "I'm not refusing to leave. I'm telling you I live here. You said you weren't a tenant." "I'm the owner's daughter." Her voice rose, sharp against the chill air. Frank didn't flinch. Anyone can say that. The audacity made her dizzy for a second. She wanted to scream at him, not just for the insult, but for the sheer absurdity of being treated like a criminal on her own family's property. Instead, she pulled out her phone again and typed a quick text to her father. "Manager won't let me in. Called cops. Please come ASAP." She hit send and watched the little delivered check mark appear. At least the message went through. From the street, faint sirens began to grow louder. Not frantic, just steady. Each second felt longer than it should. Two neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains on the ground floor. An older man in a plaid robe stepped into the courtyard, pretending to water his plants, but clearly watching the scene. A woman in yoga pants slowed her jog to a walk as she passed the front gate, eyes flicking from Jasmine to Frank and back again. Frank's posture was relaxed now, too relaxed, like a man who knew the outcome before the game had even started. 3 blocks away, Officer Daniel McCready adjusted his rearview mirror and glanced at his partner, Officer Ron Harkins, as their patrol car idled at a red light. The dispatch note had been vague. Possible trespasser at Westbrook Apartments. Female, late 20s, carrying luggage. Manager requesting verification. McCready shrugged. "Probably nothing," Harkins smirked. "Maybe, or maybe we're finally catching one of these break-in crews." "You think she's carrying a crowbar in that suitcase?" McCready said dryly. "Never know. I've seen stranger." Back in the courtyard, the sirens cut off abruptly as the patrol car pulled up to the curb. Jasmine's chest tightened. She told herself to stay calm, to keep her voice level, to be non-threatening, a set of instructions she hated herself for knowing by heart. McCready stepped out first, his manner measured, hand resting lightly on his belt. Harkins came around the passenger side, jaw tight, scanning the courtyard like he was stepping into a crime scene. Frank strode forward to meet them before Jasmine could say a word. Thanks for coming, officers, Frank said, lowering his voice as though sharing something confidential. She's been loitering here for 20 minutes, says she's visiting her father but can't provide proof. Claims he owns the place. I've got no record of her, and she tried to come in through the side gate. Harkin's eyes locked on Jasmine, his expression unreadable. Ma'am, can we see some ID? Jasmine reached into her tote slowly, deliberately, and pulled out her driver's license. She handed it to McCready, who studied it for a moment. California? He asked. Yes, I live there now. I flew in this morning to stay in Unit 5C. My father owns the building. The keypad at the front door isn't working, so I tried the side gate. Your friend here decided I must be a criminal. Frank scoffed. You're not on the lease. You're not a tenant. You expect me to just take your word for it? Why not call my father? Jasmine shot back. Frank shrugged. Didn't have the number handy. Her pulse spiked again. The number is in the management files. His name is Robert Caldwell. Check it. McCready glanced at Harkins. We can make a call. But Harkins wasn't moving toward his radio. He was looking at her suitcase. Mind if we take a look in there? Yes, I mind. Her voice was firm. I have done nothing wrong. You have no probable cause to search my belongings. Frank muttered something about uncooperative, just loud enough for Harkins to hear. The tension in the air thickened. Neighbors were gathering now. The man in the plaid robe had moved closer. The jogger was leaning on the front fence, and a teenager had appeared with his phone pointed discreetly toward the scene. McCready's tone was still level. Ma'am, if you'll just— No, Jasmine said, more sharply this time. Not until you speak to my father. 2 streets over, Robert Caldwell was pacing out of a conference room, phone in hand, just seeing her text for the first time. His assistant was still talking about the morning's meeting, but he didn't hear a word. Manager won't let me in. Called cops. The words made his stomach turn cold. He started dialing her number, quick steps carrying him toward the parking lot. In the courtyard, Harkins was taking a step closer. Look, lady, we can make this easy, or we can make it hard. What does that mean? Jasmine asked, eyes narrowing. It means if you've got nothing to hide, you'd let us search and this whole thing could be over. Or it means you don't believe me because I'm a black woman standing in front of a building I own part of, she shot back. Harkins' jaw tightened. Watch it. Frank smirked behind him. McCready glanced between them, sensing things were teetering on the edge. Ron, let's just make the call. But before they could, Jasmine's phone buzzed. Her father's name lit up the screen. She answered instantly. Dad? Jas, what's going on? His voice was sharp, urgent. I'm outside the building. The manager won't let me in, and he called the police. Before she could finish, Harkins motioned to her. Ma'am, I'll need you to put that on speaker. She stared at him, then did. Who am I speaking to? Robert demanded. This is Officer Harkins This is Robert Caldwell, owner of Westbrook Apartments. That woman is my daughter. Let her into her unit right now. There was a brief, electric pause. McCready's brows went up. Frank's smirk faltered. But the scene wasn't over yet. For a moment the courtyard went dead quiet, except for the faint gurgle of the fountain. Your daughter? McCready repeated, his tone shifting just slightly, like the ground under all their feet had tilted. Yes, Robert Caldwell said, his voice clipped, precise. My only daughter. You've detained her outside a building. She has every legal right to enter. What exactly is going on over there? Harkins, who had been radiating suspicion just seconds earlier, now looked like someone realizing he'd stepped onto a patch of black ice. He cleared his throat, glancing sidelong at Frank. Sir, the property manager here. I'm the property owner. Officer, Robert cut in, his voice as sharp as broken glass. And if my manager had called me before calling you, none of this would be happening. Frank finally spoke up, voice defensive. Mr. Caldwell, I didn't have your number on hand, and I couldn't just let anyone wander in. You have my number in your office files? Robert snapped. If you can remember to cash my payroll checks, you can remember where to find my phone number. The small cluster of neighbors watching from the courtyard exchanged glances. Someone whispered, "Wait, she's the owner's kid?" The jogger at the fence stopped pretending to stretch. The teenager with the phone grinned like he'd just won the lottery of internet drama. On speaker, Robert's voice was icy. "Jazz, stay where you are. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The line went dead. Frank shifted uneasily, muttering something under his breath as he retreated toward his office. Jasmine could almost see the cogs turning in his head, scrambling for excuses, for some way to spin this before Robert arrived in person. McCready stepped closer to Jasmine, his tone softer now. "Ma'am, if what your father says is correct, then—" "It is correct," she said evenly. "You've seen my ID. I told you who my father is. The only reason we're still standing here is because neither of you believed me." McCready opened his mouth, closed it again. He wasn't going to win that point, and he knew it. Harkins didn't say a word. His gaze had dropped to his boots. The minutes crawled by. The neighbors didn't disperse. If anything, more people trickled into the scene. A woman in a headscarf holding a grocery bag. A young man in paint-smeared jeans leaning against the fence. Some had crossed arms, others clutched their phones like they were filming. Jasmine stayed still, not because she was afraid, but because movement would give Frank or Harkins one more excuse to frame her as uncooperative. When the hum of an approaching engine broke the quiet, heads turned. A black Mercedes sedan glided up to the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the pale winter sun. The driver's door opened, and Robert Caldwell stepped out. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal overcoat, the collar turned up against the cold. His presence alone was enough to shift the atmosphere, the posture, the deliberate stride, the way his eyes locked on Frank with a controlled fury that made people instinctively take a step back. He walked straight past the officers and stopped in front of his daughter. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Jasmine said, though her voice betrayed a thin thread of anger. "But this has been," Robert turned to Frank before she could finish, "in my office. Now." Frank's mouth opened, then closed. "Sir, with all due respect, you've embarrassed yourself, my daughter, and my business in front of half the building, and you're going to explain to me why." They moved toward the lobby, but the crowd was too invested to drift away. McCready lingered near the gate, unsure if they were supposed to stay or leave. Harkins shifted awkwardly, muttering to himself. Inside the small lobby, the smell of coffee and stale carpet cleaner clung to the air. Robert stopped just inside the door, turning to face Frank. "You saw a young black woman outside my property and decided the only logical course of action was to call the police?" Frank bristled. "It's not about race. It's about security. She wasn't on the lease. She's my daughter. You work for me. That should have been the end of it." Frank's face flushed, but he didn't back down entirely. "You know we've had issues with break-ins, and you know the difference between enforcing rules and harassing people," Robert said sharply. "Or at least I thought you did." Jasmine stepped into the lobby, now, voice steady but cutting. "You didn't ask for my name until after you told me to wait outside. You didn't offer to call the owner. You assumed I was lying before I'd even explained myself. That's not security. That's profiling." Frank looked between them, realizing he was losing whatever ground he thought he had. "Look, maybe I could have handled it better." "Maybe," Jasmine repeated, her eyebrow arching. Robert's phone buzzed. He glanced down. A message from his assistant. Someone's already posting a video from the courtyard. "It's picking up views." He pocketed the phone without replying. "Go home, Frank. We'll talk tomorrow. Your position here is under review." Frank's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Outside, Robert turned to the officers. "Gentlemen, thank you for your time. I think you can see there's nothing criminal happening here." McCready nodded, clearly relieved to have an exit. "Understood, sir." Harkins muttered something that sounded like misunderstanding and followed his partner to the patrol car. The crowd began to thin, though not without a few lingering looks at Frank as he slumped toward his car. The jogger finally moved on. The teenager lowered his phone but smiled like he'd already titled the video for maximum clicks. Robert faced his daughter. "Let's get you upstairs." They walked toward the front entrance together, Jasmine wheeling her suitcase beside her. As the door clicked shut behind them, the hum of the building returned, but it was different now. The air still carried the aftershock of what had happened, the silent understanding that something had cracked open in the way people saw this place. Upstairs in 5C, the unit smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh paint. Jasmine set her bags down and sank onto the couch, exhaling for what felt like the first time in an hour. Robert stood near the window, staring out at the courtyard where the fountain still trickled. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I thought Frank could handle this job. I was wrong." "It's not just Frank," Jasmine said. "It's the way people think they can treat you when they've already decided who you are." Robert turned to look at her, the weight of her words settling between them. "Then maybe," he said, "it's time we make sure this place isn't run like that anymore." Neither of them knew yet just how far those changes would go, or how quickly the rest of the world was about to find out. It started as a whisper, not a literal sound, but the way an incident creeps beyond the walls it happened in, slipping through text messages, group chats, and social media feeds until it's everywhere. By the time Jasmine had unpacked her suitcase and set her phone on the coffee table, it had begun. Down in the courtyard, the teenager in the hoodie, the one who had filmed the entire confrontation, sat cross-legged on the low wall, editing the clip on his phone. He trimmed it for impact, Frank blocking the gate, the officers approaching, Harkins asking to search Jasmine's suitcase, her saying, "I'm the owner's daughter," and Frank's scoff right before the phone call with Robert. He captioned it, "Property manager calls cops on owner's black daughter," and added the location tag, Westbrook Apartments. Within 10 minutes, it had been shared to 3 different neighborhood Facebook groups and a tenants' rights Instagram account. Upstairs, Jasmine wasn't aware yet. She was in the kitchen, filling a glass of water when Robert's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced down and frowned. "Already? What?" she asked, turning toward him. He held up his phone so she could see a message from his assistant. "You need to see this. Going viral." Beneath it was a link. They opened it together. There she was. The grainy phone video framed her in the courtyard, suitcase at her side, Frank looming in the doorway like a guard dog who had decided she was prey. The officer's arrival looked even more intimidating on screen. 2 uniforms, hands hovering near their belts, cutting across the courtyard like they owned the ground. Then came her voice, steady but tight. "I'm the owner's daughter." The video didn't show Robert's arrival, just the moment of the reveal over speakerphone, but it was enough. The comment section was already a battlefield. "At City Watchdog, this is why we film everything." Glad she stood her ground. At Renters United, Frank Delaney been a problem. "I lived there 2 years ago, and he harassed my boyfriend weekly." At Westbrook, Mum, that's my property manager. I'm horrified. At Copwatcher 88, officer with the beard was way too eager to escalate. Jasmine stared at it for a long moment, her stomach flipping. "This isn't just embarrassing," she said quietly. "It's dangerous. This could have gone wrong in so many ways." Robert set the phone down, which is exactly why it's not staying quiet. 2 hours later, Jasmine was still trying to settle into the apartment when there was a knock at the door. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to ignore it, but Robert stepped forward and opened it. It was Mrs. Gutierrez from 4B, holding a plate of still warm empanadas. "Mia," she said, her voice thick with concern, "I saw everything. I'm so sorry." Jasmine accepted the plate, unsure how to respond. "Thank you. That's kind of you." Mrs. Gutierrez's eyes narrowed. "Frank has been like this for years. I complained to your father once, but I don't think he knew how bad it was. He scares people, especially the younger tenants. I hope you do something about it." Robert nodded slowly. "We will." By evening, the video had made its way onto Twitter, or X, as the rebranding insisted, where it took on a new life. A tenants advocacy lawyer had already offered Jasmine free legal counsel in the replies. A local reporter had DM'd her asking for comment. She scrolled, her fingers tense on the glass of her phone. Every new comment made her feel exposed, even the supportive ones. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate the outrage. It was that her humiliation had been packaged for consumption. Strangers were dissecting her posture, her tone of voice, the expression on her face, and mixed in with the solidarity were the others. At Property Rights First, looks like she's fishing for a lawsuit payday. At FrankFan72, I know Frank personally. Good man, always looking out for the place. People play the race card too quick. At Ann and Truth, why didn't she just comply and show ID sooner? She tossed the phone onto the couch, pulse pounding. I can't read any more of this. Robert leaned against the doorway. Then don't. Let me handle the noise. You focus on what matters, telling the truth when it counts. Later that night, there was another knock. This time it was softer, hesitant. When Jasmine opened the door, the calm officer from earlier, McCready, was standing there without his partner. Evening, he said, removing his cap. I wanted to check in. Off the record, she crossed her arms. About what? About earlier. I should have slowed things down sooner. I could tell something was off, but I didn't push back on Harkins enough. That's on me. Jasmine studied his face. He didn't seem like he was there for damage control. There was no badge-polished charm, no rehearsed script. Just a man who knew he'd been part of something wrong. Why are you here? She asked. Because I filed an internal note about it, he said. And because I wanted to say I'm sorry, face to face. She didn't answer right away. You should tell that to everyone who's been through this. Not just me. McCready nodded. You're right. He hesitated, then added, I think you should know. This isn't the first call like that Frank's made. Different tenants, same pattern. Might be worth looking into. When he left, she closed the door slowly, her mind already turning. The next morning she woke to a buzzing phone. Her best friend from California had texted, Earl, you're on the morning news. She blinked against the light and pulled up the link. There it was, her face on the split screen beside Frank's, with the headline, Owner's daughter detained at own property, racial bias alleged. The clip showed snippets from the video and a reporter standing outside the building. Behind them, the Westbrook sign gleamed in the winter sun, suddenly infamous. Robert was already in the kitchen, coffee in hand, phone to his ear. From his side of the conversation, Jasmine caught fragments. Yes, I'm aware. Yes, we're addressing it. I understand the PR concerns. When he hung up, his expression was carved from stone. This isn't going away quietly. And I'm not letting it. By midday, tenant after tenant came forward with stories, some to Robert directly, others on social media. A single mother who'd been accused of subletting because her cousin stayed for a week. A Nigerian student who'd been asked 3 times to prove his residency. A retired veteran who'd been threatened with eviction for leaving his bicycle in the wrong spot. The common thread was Frank, and the people he decided didn't belong. Jasmine sat in the lobby with a notebook, writing each story down as tenants came in, some hesitant, others eager. She realized she was building something, not just a case against Frank, but a portrait of the building's culture under his management. By the time the sun began to set, she had 8 pages of notes. That night, Robert stood in the living room with his coat in hand. I'm meeting with Frank tomorrow morning. I'm giving him a chance to resign before I fire him, but I want you there. Why? She asked. Because this isn't just about me as the owner. It's about you as someone he targeted. You deserve to look him in the eye when we end this. She thought about it for a moment, then nodded. I'll be there. What she didn't know was that Frank wasn't planning to go quietly. And by morning, the confrontation in the management office would draw more eyes than either of them expected. The morning air was sharp and cold, the kind that made each breath feel like inhaling glass. Jasmine wrapped her scarf a little tighter as she and Robert crossed the courtyard toward the management office. It was quiet, almost unnervingly so. No joggers, no curious tenants peeking out. After yesterday, people knew something was coming, and they were watching, just not openly. Robert's stride was steady, measured, like a man rehearsing his words in his head. Jasmine stayed half a step behind, her pulse a steady drumbeat in her ears. Frank was already inside, hunched over his desk, pretending to be absorbed in paperwork. His coffee sat untouched, steam curling in the cold light streaming through the blinds. He didn't look up until Robert spoke. "Morning, Frank." Frank leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. "Morning, boss. Guessing you're here to talk about yesterday." Robert closed the door behind them. "We're here to end this." Frank's smirk didn't falter. "End what?" "I followed procedure. Suspicious person on the property. I called it in. Turns out she's your daughter. Well, my mistake. Doesn't change the fact that I was doing my job." Jasmine stepped forward, her voice steady. "Your job isn't to decide who belongs based on the color of their skin." Frank's gaze slid to her, cold and assessing. "Don't start with that race stuff. I didn't care if you were purple. You were still trespassing." "You knew the owner's name," she shot back. "I told you. You refused to check. You could have made one phone call and avoided the whole thing. Instead, you called the police. That's what we do when strangers try to get in without being on the lease." "I'm not a stranger," she said, her voice rising. "I'm the owner's daughter. You just decided that couldn't be true because it didn't fit your idea of who belongs here." Robert stepped in now, his voice low but dangerous. "Frank, this isn't an isolated incident. Tenants have come forward with stories, plenty of them. The same pattern every time. Harassment, intimidation, selective enforcement of rules. I gave you authority to protect this property, not to turn it into your personal kingdom." Frank's smirk slipped for the first time. "People complain when you enforce rules. That's not on me. It's on you when you enforce them against some and not others," Robert said. "It's on you when your security calls are about the same kinds of people over and over again." Frank's jaw tightened. "So what? You're firing me because of a misunderstanding? Because a couple of tenants want to whine about me doing my job?" Robert didn't hesitate. "I'm firing you because you've become a liability, legally, financially, and morally. You'll collect your final paycheck today. Your key card will be deactivated by noon." For a second, Frank just sat there, his knuckles whitening on the armrests. Then he stood abruptly, pushing his chair back so hard it scraped the wall. "Fine, but don't think this is over. People talk, Mr. Caldwell, and they'll talk about this." Robert's eyes didn't waver. "Let them. The truth doesn't scare me." Frank looked at Jasmine one last time, his expression a mix of resentment and something darker. "You think you've won something here, but all you've done is make enemies." Jasmine didn't flinch. "If standing up for myself makes me your enemy, I'm fine with that." Frank's lip curled in a humorless smile. "Enjoy your little victory, princess." Then he grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair and shoved past them, the door slamming against the wall as he left. The silence after his departure was thick, almost suffocating. Robert exhaled slowly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "That could have gone worse." Jasmine looked at him sharply. "That could have gone violent." "Which is why I wanted you here," he said. "So you'd see it for yourself. So you'd know exactly what kind of person we're dealing with." She thought about the way Frank had looked at her on his way out. Not just anger, but calculation. It wasn't over. Not for him. By the time they stepped back into the courtyard, word had spread. Mrs. Gutierrez from 4B was leaning on her balcony railing. The man in paint-smeared jeans gave Jasmine a small nod from across the way. Even the teenager with the phone was there, thumbs flying across his screen like he couldn't post fast enough. "Is it true?" Mrs. Gutierrez called down. "Frank's gone?" Robert looked up at her. "As of today, yes." A ripple of murmured approval passed through the courtyard. Back upstairs, Jasmine finally let herself collapse onto the couch. "I thought I'd feel relieved," she said, "but I don't." Robert poured himself a glass of water. "That's because the fight's not over. Firing Frank is step 1. Fixing the culture he left behind is step 2. And step 3 is making sure he can't keep doing this somewhere else. How do we even do that? He looked at her over the rim of his glass. By keeping the truth public. It wasn't long before her phone lit up again, this time a call from a local journalist. The story had already broken on 2 news outlets, and now everyone wanted an interview. Jasmine hesitated, then agreed to meet at the building later that afternoon. When the reporter arrived, camera crew in tow, the interview took place in the very courtyard where it had all started. The irony wasn't lost on her. He called the police before even trying to verify who I was, she told the camera. And it wasn't the first time he's treated someone that way. I'm speaking out because I don't want anyone else to go through it. By the time the segment aired on the evening news, her words were clipped into a 30-second soundbite, but the impact was there. The headline read, "Owner's daughter speaks out after racial profiling incident at Westbrook Apartments." That night, Robert received an email from the company's legal team. Multiple tenants have requested formal mediation. At least 2 are considering legal action against Frank personally. Jasmine read over his shoulder. "Do you think they'll actually go through with it?" "I hope they do," Robert said. "It's the only way people like him learn." But as they were settling in for the night, a new notification popped up on Jasmine's phone, an anonymous message through Instagram. "Careful who you talk to. You never know who's listening." There was no profile picture, no posts, just those words. Her stomach turned cold. Frank was gone from Westbrook, but he wasn't finished with her. Jasmine stared at the message for a long time, the glow of the screen cold against her fingers. Careful who you talk to. You never know who's listening. It wasn't long, it wasn't specific, but the weight of it sank deep. Robert looked up from his laptop when he saw her expression. "What is it?" She handed him the phone. His jaw tightened instantly. "Frank?" "I can't prove it's him," she said, though the thought was obvious. "It's from a blank account. No posts, no picture. Could be anyone who saw the story." Robert set the phone down carefully. "We're not going to play his games. If it happens again, we go straight to the police." The irony of that wasn't lost on her. She almost laughed, but it came out as a sharp exhale. "Yeah, because they were so helpful last time." By the next morning, the story had broken beyond their city. A national morning show replayed the video, pausing at the moment she told the officers who she was. The anchor's voice was indignant. "Imagine being treated like a trespasser on property your family owns." Hashtags started trending. Hashtag Westbrook Incident. Hashtag Profilingathon and hashtag IDONT belong. Messages poured into Jasmine's inbox. Strangers from across the country were sharing their own experiences of being challenged, questioned, or humiliated in places where they had every right to be. Some were angry. Some were heartbreaking. All of them carried the same thread. This happens more than people think. She read them in silence, feeling the scope of the thing widen beyond her. Mid-morning, Robert called an all-tenant meeting in the courtyard. The winter sun was weak but bright, bouncing off the apartment windows as people gathered, bundled in coats and scarves, some holding coffee mugs, others with arms crossed tight. Jasmine stood to the side, listening as her father addressed them. "I want to make one thing clear," Robert began, voice carrying easily. "The incident that took place here 2 days ago should never have happened. It was a failure of management, a failure of trust, and a violation of the respect every resident deserves." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Frank Delaney is no longer employed here," he continued. "But removing one person doesn't erase the harm that's been done. If you've experienced harassment or discrimination here, I want to hear from you. My daughter and I are compiling every story so we can make changes at last." An older man spoke up from near the back. "Changes are good, but what about accountability? People here have been afraid to speak out because they thought management wouldn't listen." "That changes now," Robert said without hesitation. "Starting today, there's an open-door policy. You can speak to me or my daughter directly. No retaliation. No threats. Period." After the meeting, tenants lingered to talk to Jasmine. A woman in her 20s told her about being accused of sneaking in when she forgot her key card. A man in his 40s said Frank had once threatened to tow his car for parking in his own spot. A mother with a toddler described how Frank had followed her to her unit because guests don't usually have strollers. By the time she made it back upstairs, Jasmine's notebook had another 4 pages filled. That afternoon, the local tenants' rights organization called. They wanted her to speak at a press conference the next day alongside other residents who had experienced harassment by property managers. Her first instinct was to say no. She was still raw from the initial incident, but something in her said this wasn't just about her anymore. She agreed. That evening, the second message came. This time it wasn't vague. You should have kept quiet. People don't like troublemakers. Accidents happen. Her hand tightened around the phone. Robert was across the room on a call with his lawyer. When she showed him the message, he ended the call mid-sentence. "That's it," he said. "We're reporting this." At the precinct, the desk sergeant took her statement, logging the messages as harassment. But the moment she left, she could feel the skepticism from certain officers. The unspoken question hung in the air. Was it really a threat or just internet noise? She didn't care. The report was on record now. The next day's press conference was held on the steps of City Hall. Cameras were everywhere, local, regional, even 1 or 2 from national outlets. Jasmine stood at the podium after 3 other speakers, her breath visible in the cold. "I came home for a visit," she began, "and ended up being treated like a criminal on property my family owns. Not because I posed a threat, not because I broke any rules, but because someone decided I didn't belong." She let the silence stretch a moment, scanning the crowd. "I'm here because I know I'm not the only one. I've heard your stories in the last 2 days, from neighbors, from strangers online, from people in cities I've never even visited. This isn't just about one property manager. This is about a system that makes it easy for certain people to wield authority like a weapon." The applause was immediate, sharp in the winter air. When she returned to Westbrook that afternoon, there were news vans parked outside. Reporters tried to get her to stop for a quote, but she slipped inside quickly. Robert was in the lobby, speaking to Mrs. Gutierrez. She was clutching a printout of an online forum post, someone claiming to have dirt on Jasmine's family, implying shady business deals. "They're trying to smear you," Mrs. Gutierrez warned. Robert took the paper, scanning it with a scowl. Anonymous garbage. But Jasmine knew better. Anonymous garbage could still stick if repeated enough times. That night, her phone rang. It wasn't a number she recognized, but something made her answer. A low, deliberate voice spoke. "You've made your point. Now stop, or you'll regret it." The line went dead before she could reply. Her hand shook as she set the phone down. She didn't tell Robert immediately, not because she wanted to hide it, but because she needed a moment to process the fact that this had just escalated beyond online threats. The following morning, she woke to see her name in another headline. Westbrook incident sparks city council debate on tenant protection laws. For the first time since this started, she felt something close to hope. The fight wasn't over, but it was starting to turn. By the weekend, Westbrook Apartments had become something Jasmine had never imagined it could be, the center of a movement. It started small. The day after the press conference, a few tenants taped handwritten signs to their doors that read, "We stand with Jasmine." By Friday evening, nearly half the doors on her floor had them. Someone printed larger ones for the lobby. Downstairs, the community bulletin board, once a faded cork slab with outdated flyers, had turned into a living wall of support. Messages in different languages spilled across colorful sticky notes. "We believe you. No more harassment. Power to tenants." Jasmine walked through the lobby that morning and felt something shift inside her. The tension that had once clung to the building now seemed to be transforming into unity. But it wasn't just the tenants here. The video of her confrontation with Frank had ignited conversations across the city. Neighborhood groups were holding forums on racial profiling, and abuse of power in housing. Local activists began tagging the mayor's office in posts demanding stronger tenant protections. Robert, who had once been cautious about public attention, now seemed fully committed. "We have to ride this wave," he told her. "If people are listening, we have a responsibility to speak." On Saturday afternoon, Robert hosted a tenants' town hall in the courtyard. Plastic chairs were set up in neat rows, a folding table at the front with coffee and pastries. A microphone and portable speaker carried their voices across the open space. Jasmine stood beside her father as he addressed the crowd. "This building will never again be a place where people fear the person meant to protect it," he said. "From now on, security and management will be trained in anti-bias practices, and tenant grievances will be addressed directly by ownership." A cheer rippled through the crowd. Then he handed the microphone to Jasmine. She swallowed, scanning the rows of faces, neighbors she'd passed in the hallway, people she barely knew, all watching her now. "I didn't want to be in this position," she began. "But the truth is, what happened to me could have happened to any one of you, and in some cases it has. We can't let those moments stay quiet. Silence is how this keeps happening." The applause was louder this time, more sustained. But unity had its shadows. As the meeting broke up, Jasmine noticed a man standing just beyond the gate. Stocky build, ball cap pulled low, phone in hand. He wasn't recording the event. His camera was pointed at her specifically. When she met his eyes, he smirked and walked away. That evening, another message arrived on her phone. "You're making too much noise. Don't be surprised when things get messy." This time, she told Robert immediately. His reaction was sharp. "We're going to the police again, and we're installing cameras on this floor tomorrow." The officer who took the report seemed more attentive than before, especially when she mentioned the man by the gate. But Jasmine could tell they weren't holding their breath for a breakthrough. Sunday brought a different kind of escalation. Someone posted an anonymous blog article titled, "The Truth About Jasmine Caldwell." It claimed she had a history of fabricating discrimination claims for attention, citing no evidence but weaving enough innuendo to sound plausible to those who wanted to believe it. Within hours, it had been shared by an online group defending property managers under attack. Jasmine's first instinct was to ignore it, but Robert was firm. "We don't let lies stand unanswered." He contacted his lawyer, who began the process of issuing a takedown notice. Still, the damage was done. By the afternoon, she had strangers DMing her things like "liar" and "get over yourself." And yet, the community pushback was louder. Tenants groups flooded the blog's comment section with rebuttals. Local activists began sharing receipts, literal documents of Frank's prior complaints from other buildings he'd worked at. The narrative was shifting back. On Monday, Jasmine attended a city council hearing on tenant rights. She wasn't on the agenda to speak, but when one of the council members referenced her case as an example of the need for reform, she stood up from the gallery. "May I respond?" she asked. The chair allowed it. She walked to the podium, every eye in the chamber on her. "My case is not unique," she said. "It's just visible because it went viral. But there are thousands of tenants in this city who experience harassment and profiling without a single camera to prove it. If we want change, it has to go beyond reacting to the videos we see. It has to be built into how we run our housing." She stepped away to applause that echoed in the chamber's high ceilings. When she got home that night, Mrs. Gutierrez was waiting by her door with a small tin of cookies. "For strength," she said simply. "You're fighting for all of us." Jasmine smiled, but her chest felt heavy. She was fighting, but the threats kept coming. Another message pinged in her inbox, "You're not safe here." That night she dreamed of the courtyard, but it was empty, silent, the fountain dry. She woke to the sound of her phone buzzing and saw a security alert from the new cameras Robert had installed. At 3:14 a.m., the footage showed a figure in a hoodie trying the handle of her apartment door. The grainy still image from the security camera was burned into Jasmine's mind, a figure in a dark hoodie, standing just inches from her apartment door, hand testing the knob. Robert was already dressed when she emerged from her bedroom. "We're going to the police now." It was barely dawn, but the adrenaline had already erased any thought of sleep. They brought the footage on a flash drive, and this time the desk sergeant's expression shifted from polite disinterest to something sharper. "This isn't just harassment anymore," he said, replaying the clip. "It's attempted unlawful entry. We'll circulate this image to our patrol units and see if we get a match." Jasmine didn't miss the way Robert's jaw flexed. "Do it fast," he said. By mid-morning, the footage was everywhere, not just with the police, but on social media. Tenants' groups posted it with captions like, "When speaking out makes you a target." The solidarity was immediate and fierce. Neighbors left their doors unlocked, so Jasmine could duck into their apartments if she felt unsafe. Someone volunteered to walk her to and from her car. It was protection, but it also felt like living under siege. That afternoon, she was in the lobby collecting her mail when the teenager who'd filmed the original incident burst through the doors. "I think I saw him." Her heart kicked. "Who?" "The guy from your camera, over by the corner store." Robert, who had been talking with the new security guard, turned instantly. "Show me." Within minutes they were on the sidewalk, the winter sun glaring in their eyes. Across the street, a man in a dark hoodie stood by the store window, pretending to browse the display. It was Frank. Robert didn't waste time. He crossed the street with the kind of purposeful stride that made people instinctively move aside. Jasmine followed close behind, her pulse pounding in her ears. When Frank saw them, he smirked. "Afternoon." "You tried my daughter's door," Robert said flatly. Frank spread his hands in mock innocence. "Can't prove it was me." "We have the footage," Jasmine said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were fists at her sides. "Same build, same shoes. Same way you stand with your weight on your left leg." Frank's smirk twitched. "You've been watching me that closely?" "Flattering." Robert took a step closer. "You're done, Frank, with this building, with this city, if I can help it. The police have the footage. You'll be hearing from them." Frank shrugged, but there was a flicker of something behind his eyes. Not fear. Exactly. But the realization that his control over this narrative was slipping away. The next day, the police confirmed they'd brought Frank in for questioning. Word spread fast through the building, then through the city. Local news stations camped outside Westbrook's gates, waiting for statements. Robert agreed to give one, with Jasmine at his side. Standing in front of the cameras, he spoke first. "My daughter was harassed, profiled, and threatened in her own home. But she refused to be silent. We're pursuing every legal avenue to ensure Frank Delaney is held accountable, and we're pushing for reforms to protect tenants across this city." Then Jasmine stepped forward. "This isn't just about me. It's about every person who's been told they don't belong somewhere they have every right to be. It's about safety, dignity, and justice. And we're not stopping until we have all three." The applause from the gathered tenants was immediate, heartfelt. Over the next week, the momentum didn't slow. The city council fast-tracked a new tenant protection ordinance, requiring property managers to undergo anti-bias training and creating a clear process for filing complaints without retaliation. Frank, meanwhile, faced misdemeanor charges for harassment and trespassing. It wasn't the kind of punishment that would make headlines for years, but it was a public mark, one that would follow him into every job application. On the night the ordinance passed, the courtyard was alive again for the first time in years. String lights were hung from balcony to balcony. Neighbors brought food to share, and the fountain, the same one that had rippled listlessly the day she arrived, had been cleaned and restored, water sparkling under the lights. Mrs. Gutierrez found Jasmine in the crowd and hugged her tightly. "You didn't just change this building," she said. "You changed all of us." Later, Jasmine stood with Robert at the edge of the courtyard, watching children run between the benches, their laughter echoing off the walls. "When I first got here," she said, "it felt heavy, like the air itself didn't want me here. And now? Robert asked. She smiled faintly. Now it feels like home. The finality of it wasn't in Frank's arrest, or the ordinance, or even the restored peace in the building. It was in the knowledge that she'd taken something ugly, something meant to humiliate and silence her, and turned it into a force for change. And that force wasn't going away.